lower age limit for children. There are some people who are very prominent firearms users in New Zealand who have said publicly that they have taught their child to use a firearm at the age of 3. It is very common for these people to talk about children starting to use firearms at the age of 5 or 6. We believe this is too young. We think the reason that there are not more accidents and injuries to children is our storage regulations, and that's good, but the influence of these ideas is pernicious. We believe that 13 and over is an appropriate age for people to start being trained in the use of firearms and handling firearms, and that those aged 12 and under should not be using firearms, whether supervised by a licensed firearms owner or not. And we draw the committee's attention to other activities like riding quad bikes, using fireworks, and so on, where our ideas of what is appropriate have been tightened very considerably over recent decades.
David. Yes, thank you for your submission. I'm just interested in your commentary that you didn't want to see children under 12 utilising firearms. What's the basis for that? Is it are children under 12 committing gun crime, or are they forming habits that lead them to commit gun crime? What was your evidential basis?
As we all know, children develop and mature, and parents spend a great deal of effort and energy, as do teachers, in assessing the capacity of children to engage in various activities as simple as crossing a road, for example. Now, when we look at the decisions that were made around quad bikes, the decision was made that, and also when we look at, sorry, I should say this is also another instance where the USA provides us with a litany of tragedies, where there really are disasters in terms of children not being strong enough to hold firearms, to manage the recoil. There are disasters where children, the gun safety training that has been widely promoted by the National Rifle Association has been very thoroughly assessed by researchers and has been found not to prevent children from picking up firearms or doing things with them. It's really a question of the maturity that we think of, and I think that when we think about what are the activities that we normally permit children to engage in. And I think the reason, as I said, I think in my original comment, the reason we haven't had a lot of disasters, I suspect, is that most parents do not actually allow their children to use firearms at a young age because they're not using firearms at all.
But the purpose of my question is that you promote yourselves as being evidence-based and focused on public safety. So you've just spoken for quite a long time, but it's not clear what problem you're trying to solve with this particular position. In fact, at the end of your answer, you seem to concede that there isn't a problem you're trying to solve. Just a personal view.
I think we're looking forward to a problem because what we're having is a heavy promotion of children's use of firearms by people who claim to be responsible and law-abiding firearms owners. And that this is another instance where we should actually be getting in ahead of the curve before we have the impact of those kinds of attitudes.
Right. So your final position is that you are in favour of restricting anybody under 12 from using a firearm under parental supervision because you think there might be a future problem.
I think because there are problems in other countries, in fact, that we can use evidence from elsewhere.
Okay, I've got Clayton and then we might be out of time.
Yeah, thanks. I've got a couple of questions. The first question is around the establishment of Guncontrol New Zealand. I mean, straight, we've got the co-founders here. How long have you had your organisation set up? It's May, I believe.
We formally incorporated in May, and we got together and decided to do this in April. So this was very much a response to what had happened in Christchurch.
And have you had any direct involvement with firearms? Are you a hunter? Have you ever used a firearm? Have you ever...
I myself was involved in a lotteries-funded research project through 2017 and 18 because we were concerned about the firearms law in New Zealand. I don't accept the premise of your question, which is that people who do not have direct experience of using firearms do not have a capacity.
No, you didn't
to
say that. He just said no.
What involvement
just answer the question.
I mean, you talk about evidence-based, and I acknowledge that. But, you know, you also talk about reducing the licensing age time frames from 10 years down to 3 years, and you talk about evidence. But have you got evidence that you can show that that is actually going to reduce any potential harm or have fixing to a problem, or is it just something that you feel philosophically that this will have an impact, or is it actually evidence-based?
In terms of those aged under 30, they are shown in the research impact statement not to be law abiding.
There was a 10-year licensing, you said you want to reduce it down to 3. What evidence?
Excuse me, I'm just getting to that. We think that because of the changes in what is happening to those young people in that period of their lives, it would be more appropriate to have a shorter licensing period. We also have an issue at the other end of the licensed firearms owners group, which is with older people. Over 50% of licensed firearm owners are now over 50. We know that capacity declines at a certain point and that we have no system at all for moving firearms out of the hands out of the hands of those who are getting. I'm sorry, I don't have data on the top age group. But we do have, I'm sorry, we have rising rates of dementia. We have problems with cognitive decline. We need to actually make sure that we have a system for removing firearms from people who are no longer competent to manage them.
Answered my question perfectly. Thank you.
Thank you. We've got time for Brett.
Okay, thank you very much. Have you had any discussions with any ministers or government officials about being members of the proposed firearms advisory group?
No.
Okay, you made a comment about keeping guns out of criminals' hands and what have you. Are you aware of the evidence received by the Law and Order Select Committee in the 2016-17 inquiry into firearms possession that 90% of firearms used in criminal offences in Australia which has a register are unregistered?
Oh, that can't be true.
I think the overall, can you
It is
speak
true.
to the overall decline in offences?
I mean,
in
you will
Australia?
see in our submission the impact on mass shootings that the National Firearms Committee has
I'm
had.
talking specifically about the evidence from Australia that was received by that committee.
We're talking about the evidence for the impact of the reform of firearm law in Australia after Port Arthur, which was that while there may well be, we all know that there are a considerable number of non-registered firearms in New Zealand as well as in Australia, and we've also seen evidence of use of non-registered firearms in the
But what that
UK.
data does show is
But
that
what I would like to suggest is that what that shows is that as we go on maintaining a register, we will gradually
it didn't work in Australia.
move those.
So what it does show
Excuse me,
is that
it
it
did
won't
work.
keep
Brett,
hands.
would you like to carry on?
What it does show, I would contend, is that having a register does not keep firearms out of criminal hands. 10% of offences involving firearms are registered. The firearms are registered. A tiny proportion of the firearms offences. So the register, I contend, in Australia, it's been in effect for some years, is not doing anything to either keep guns out of criminal hands to any great substance or to
Well, except
prevent
reduce
crime.
the incidence of mass shootings, which is a pretty important impact.
What are the definitions of mass shooting used in Australia?
Well, in the evidence, it's 5 or more where the perpetrator was not killed.
And they're not known to them, all right? So what if it's a family shooting? Could be multiple persons, but it's not classed as mass shooting.
New Zealand's not free of those either.
What if we take them out? What if we include them?
Oh, we're at time, so I think we'll have to leave it at that. Thank you very much for your submission. Thank you for coming in today. Okay, we have the